Hello, I'm Miss Rosie from Creative World Art Center. Usually we come into your classroom and give you an art lesson, but since we're at home, I'll teach you another art lesson here from my home. Today we're going to be making a landscape collage that has a little bit of pop-up relief to it. Now relief means not quite as round as a sculpture, but not as flat as a painting or drawing. It has a little bit of depth to it. Today we're going to be doing maybe a city, maybe a landscape. This one I made with construction paper and cardstock, but this one I actually just made from things that came in the mail, packaging, cereal boxes, things like that. So I'll give you the choice to do either. And I think instead of just doing a city today or just doing a landscape in the country today, I'll do a little bit of a combination for you. Before we begin, we're going to need a few materials. You will need some glue, some scissors, some art materials like construction paper, cardstock, origami paper. Those would be great, but if you don't have them, don't worry. You can also use things that you have at home from the office. These are Post-its in different colors. Here's a cereal packaging, a magazine, some other mailers that had colors. Graph paper's kind of fun texture. The goal is to have different colors and textures, some lights, some darks. Here's a wrapping paper book that has a nice pattern on it. So what are you going to use for your base paper, the big one? I've got a big piece of heavy-duty construction paper, but if you can't use construction paper, if you don't have any, totally fine. One of my bases, I used a paper bag. I'm going to start by making my base from the paper bag. I only want to have the big side because it's going to be a big triangle that I'm going to start with. So I'm going to cut it off from the rest of the bag. Now that I've got my sheet, the one piece that's less usable is the handle. So I'm gonna see if I can very carefully pull that off without ripping the bottom paper. So here I have my big sheet, but I don't want a rectangle. I actually want a triangle. So I'm gonna turn it and cut it on its diagonal all the way from corner to corner. Now, it's okay if it's a little wobbly. It's all gonna get covered up anyway. Now that I have my right triangle, and a right triangle means that this is a 90-degree angle, kind of like a square edge. Now I'm gonna work on my fold. Now what I want for this is actually what's called a trifold, even though there's only 2 folds, but there's 3 different parts of the paper. So I'm gonna go in the middle and pull this over, but I don't want this big tail hanging out. I wanna keep finding that place where it'll be even on each section so that it will line up, so that this point will line up with that fold and this fold will line up with that piece of paper. It's okay to take a minute to work out where this goes. Now another thing that's important is that this is all lined up. This bottom part is all lined up. We don't want it up here or our piece will fall over when we try and stand it up. We need to make sure that that's all lined up. And once we've got it, then you want to press it down and crease those 2 sides. Give it a nice clean edge. Now let's double check and make sure that that's really straight. If it's not, go ahead and take your scissors and trim it so that it's really flat. It's okay if you have a little tail hanging off. So now we've got our whole piece here and it actually should be able to stand up. And if you look at it from above, it's like a big Z pattern. You open it up a little bit and ta-da, it's a standing background base. So one thing I want to call your attention to is the idea of perspective and distance. So a lot of you have learned in class that the further away something is, the smaller it looks. So in this case, that's what we're really going for. Now the furthest away part of my city is actually going to be the tippy top back. So higher up, the smaller it gets, and lower down and towards the front, the bigger it gets. So we're gonna say that the highest point, this top piece here, is where the smallest objects are gonna be, whether they're buildings or mountains or trees or clouds or whatever you're making. So this has to be the smallest section, and I want you to see that even this building in the back is no bigger really than my pinky finger, my littlest finger. But down here in the front, these buildings are as big as my hand. So we're going to be making lots of different sizes. So the next thing I'm going to need are all my different elements on here. And before I glue them down, I like to cut them all out. When we're choosing our colors, we want to make sure that we've got a big variety so they stand out from each other. If I did blue on top of blue, it sort of disappears. I can't see it anymore. So the goal here is to choose colors next to each other that have high contrast and different colors so they'll really stand out and pop. So as I'm choosing my buildings, I want to make sure that I'm making some that are really small, some that are medium-sized, and some that are even bigger. So this one here is a good one. It's a small size, about a little bit bigger than my pinky, and that can go in the way back. But I might want to make some bigger ones as well to go down lower. That's a much bigger one. So this one will go down front, and this one will go up high. Now that I've got my 3 basic sizes, I'm going to begin gluing. But what's important to remember is to start small and high and add as you move down. So I'll open this up and I'm going to start gluing my pieces on the tippy top. We're going to take our littlest buildings. The part that's really important is to make sure that we don't glue them all the way across. Now I don't put glue all the way to the top because I'm going to want my top to stick out over the top edge of my paper. So when I put it down, there's no glue up here. There's just glue where it's going to stick down. And the top of my building is reaching out above the slope here. That's very important. We don't want to see this slope. We want to see the uneven shapes of the buildings coming down. The next thing that's important is to overlap. We don't want to see spaces in between our buildings. We want it to look densely packed. Again, trying very hard to make sure that I'm having high contrast and big differences in my colors and shapes. Now, as you're going down that back fold, the buildings are going to get bigger and bigger. It's also okay for them to stick out a little bit on the sides. That gives it that big filled up space kind of feel. Now, as I get towards the bottom, I'm even going to put a pretty big building down here. Now I've got the back part of my city pretty much set in there. I'm going to go now to the middle section, which is where I've got the hills. Now, just like with the city, I do want to layer my hills down so that it feels like there are one in front of the other in front of the other. Now I've got my back layer of city, my middle layer of hills, but I think my front layer, I'm going to add another building, another couple big buildings. Now that I'm going back to the city again, I want to make sure that I've got that skyline sticking out above the fold. So the building is sticking up above that background piece of paper. So now I've got my 3 layers. I've got my big buildings in the front, my hills in the middle, and my city in the back. So now I can add a few details. I might do a tree on the mountains. I might do some windows in the building, especially the ones towards the front where I'd really be able to see them. I want to make sure my tree is not too big. It should be smaller than these small buildings, maybe only about a little smaller than my pinky. Now the way I make trees is I make a general tree shape and then I cut out the space around the roots and then also around the branches. So now I've got the cutout of my roots and branches, but I do want to have a little canopy. My canopy will go behind it and be sort of that usual canopy tree shape that we think of. Looks kind of like a green cloud, but I can glue that onto there, and then this can be on my hill. And now I think some of these buildings could use some windows, especially this one. Now I could keep going. I could make lots of teeny tiny windows. I could add a few small windows in the back. We could just keep going and making details all day long, and that would be really fun. But I think I'm gonna call this done for today. And there you have it. I can pull it forward so that it can stand on its own. And I've got my foreground, which is the city with the details like windows, the bigger buildings. I've got my middle ground, which is the country with the hills and the tree, which is pretty small. And then I've got my background, which is the teeny tiny buildings, which are furthest away. So here we have the relief landscape collage. Thank you so much for making the project with me. I would love to see your project. If you can, please email it to info@cw-arts.org. If you're interested in some other great programming that we do with our live teachers, you can go to cw-arts.org and see our wonderful summer programming. Have a wonderful summer. Thank you so much for making projects. Keep making art, keep being creative, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.